Have you ever done extra work on a job site and the builder just pretends it never happens? This one mistake is costing subcontractors thousands of dollars, and I'm going to show you how to stop it. Hi, I'm Kevin from Cornerstone Estimating, and in this video I'm going to show you how to prepare and submit variations so that they are approved and paid every time. The one mistake I see subcontractors doing all the time is carrying out variation works without written instruction. The job site is running so busy, they think that a verbal instruction or a verbal discussion on site is enough to just make things happen. Unfortunately, many site staff and project managers aren't aware of the commercial procedures necessary in order to get variations submitted, approved, and paid. Like you, they are also very focused on building the project and making sure that it gets done in accordance with the program. And unless you follow due process in your contract, your variation that has been verbally approved on site is likely to get rejected by the builder's upper management. Well, I've got an example contract here where in clause 12.7, it talks about how the direction of the head contractor, other than the direction that is expressly stated to be a variation notification issued by the head contractor, is nonetheless a variation to vary the work. Here's the important part. The subcontractor must, prior to carry out any work in which the direction relates, notify the head contractor in writing within 4 business days. The claim together with full particulars thereof are lodged in writing with the head contractor no later than 4 days after the subcontractor becomes aware. So basically what this clause is saying is that if you are made aware of a variation, whether it's verbal or discussion on site, or something is inherently varying away from your original contract obligation, you have 4 business days to notify the head contractor. Otherwise, they will use this clause against you that you didn't follow this clause, therefore they don't need to pay you. Another common mistake I see happen all the time is that subcontractors submit variations without any backup information. So no photos, no invoice, no supporting invoices, no email correspondences, no breakdown. They just submit a lump sum and then they expect to be paid. Another mistake that I see that always ends up poorly is that subbies don't have time to sort out the variations throughout construction. So they do all the work and then they take note of all the variations throughout the construction, and then they bundle all of it at the end of the job as one big lump sum for the additional cost of the project. So obviously that doesn't work because of the time bar requirements in your contract, and it's a lot of work for the builder to do at the very end when they should be doing it spread out throughout the construction. So how do we follow due process in our contract? Here's the correct life cycle for every variation that you need to submit. Step 1, notification. As soon as you're made aware of a variation, spend 5 minutes drafting an email to give written notice that you think or that you believe that the works that have been discussed on site or from a site meeting is deemed to be a variation under your contract. So just like in that previous example, I showed you that clause in that contract. If you don't submit a notification within the required time frame, they will use that against you to not pay you. So here's a couple of good examples from the same contract. We've got clause 12.5 here, which says the subcontractor must not undertake any work, urgent or otherwise, the subject of a variation, unless it has first received written direction from the head contractor to proceed. Yep, and you will have no entitlement arising out of or in connection with the variation notification if the subcontractor proceeds with the work in the absence of the head contractor first giving notice to proceed, and you'll be barred from making a claim. So there's that. And there's also 12.8 here where it says if the subcontractor fails to give the head contractor the written notice in accordance with the preceding clause, the subcontractor is not entitled to later assert the direction amount to a variation, or to any compensation on the basis that the direction amounted to a variation, or make any claim on the basis that the direction amounted to the variation. So basically what it's saying is you can't save it to the end and then assert that it was a variation, and so because this clause will just put it into that. So when you submit your variation, don't just submit it as a lump sum. You gotta price it with proper breakdowns, right? Like what's your quantity, what quantity are you using, what rate are you using, and what's the evidence for those? Have you measured it on the drawing? Have you got your supplier's invoices or your supplier's quote to justify the rates that you're using? You basically need to show you're working, because if you don't do the work, you're adding friction to the builder. So then the likelihood of him paying you is actually less. So make it as smooth and frictionless as possible for him. So I've just got this dummy payment claim template on screen based on a live project, but I've just hidden the particulars. So there's a summary of the contract works, a breakdown and then the variation works. And I wanted to focus on this variation tab a little bit. So if you're short on time and you need to meet all these variation notifications and submissions, the quick and dirty way to do it is you would just list down the different variations that you've got, and you end up in a situation where you've got two line items that are meant for the same work. So for example, in this case, they've got a credit for the standard carpet to the level 5 penthouse, and then they've added this Bremworth Untouched custom carpet to the level 5 penthouse. So the net addition for this variation is actually 9,700. So throughout the construction, you would just make this list super long, and then it will get messy. But if you want to do it properly, to make sure that you're keeping track of basically all the different happenings for each variation, because each variation will be assessed on its own merit. You can't really use the situation, the context of one variation, and then choose whether or not you want to pay for another variation. I know builders like to do that, but it's not quite right. So the correct way to do this is, I've just got this variation 1 tab here. Now this should actually be variation 5, because I'm just trying to show you what it should look like. Basically, it's almost the same thing, but instead of having these two lines here floating, you would have a separate sheet, call it variation 5, and then you would probably describe it like upgrade of L5 penthouse bedrooms, and then you would show the working quantity and the rate that you're using. To justify the quantity, you will need to attach a measurement of the omission and a measurement of the addition to prove that. And then for the rate, the omission can be a contract rate, or you would get a quote from, I don't know, when you were tendering this work like a year ago or whatever, to justify that amount. And then the addition rate, you would get a quote from Brentworth to justify that amount. So all of it needs to be justified. And then the beauty here is that you've got the total for the omission, you got the total for the addition, and then the net, which is just this plus this, and then you get the total, 9788. And then all you need to do is copy that and then paste it in this line here, like that. Okay, get rid of all this. And then this becomes the one line for variation 5. And then you would copy the description, so upgrade like that. Anytime you want to look at the breakdown of that, you've got an independent sheet just to show how that amount is derived. Now, it sounds like it's a lot of work, but when you've got a project going on for like over a year and variations just keep piling up, and there's different situations like the underlay or the floor prep, or the change in finishes, or they're deleting a whole level, or they're upgrading this or upgrading that. You just want to know all the different adds and omits, and you want to document that properly. And this is the way to do it. I should also mention that when you're doing these omissions, it's important to be honest about it and be upfront about if you know that there's an omission, the builder 100% knows that there's an omission. So there's no point ignoring the omission and just submitting the addition, hoping they won't know, and then having that argument later. It just puts cracks in the trust between you and the main contractor, which is not ideal. You want that trusting relationship, so then both parties work quickly and efficiently together because they already trust each other. So also, when you submit the omission upfront, you have an opportunity to control the anchor amount for the omission, especially when it comes to like commercial negotiations at the end. But it's more important that you are upfront about the omission and build that trust. Take that opportunity to build that trust. Also, contracts nowadays have an order of precedence for how variations are going to be assessed. So it's best to submit your variation in accordance with that hierarchy, so then you don't have to keep revising or doing it again, and you just submit the variation correctly once. So the submission, all you need to do is compile all of your information into one neat little PDF and then send it as one PDF. So one PDF, one variation. So during the builder's assessment phase, there are only one of two scenarios that can happen. The first scenario is the instructions for you to proceed comes after the costs are approved. Now, this is the best case scenario for all parties, but it is the most contract admin heavy for the subcontractor, because the subcontractor will need to submit the claim and submit all the supporting evidence together, all within the required time frame, and then wait for it to get approved before proceeding with the works. And we both know that's highly unlikely. The more likely scenario is scenario 2, which is the instruction to proceed is given to you before costs are approved. Now, this will be very, very familiar and is by far the most common scenario, because the construction work on site takes priority over back-end admin that will often get shelved in favor of getting things done on site. So to protect yourself in this situation, you should try and prioritize submitting your cost urgently and quickly. Because if the cost comes back much higher than what the builder is expecting, you run the risk of the builder disputing it and then you get into arguments while the work is already complete. Not a fun situation to be in. Now I hear you say, if the costs aren't approved, then I'm just not going to proceed with the variation. Unfortunately, 99% of contracts have this clause that says if you are given an instruction to proceed with a variation on site, you must proceed with the variation while costs are to be assessed later. I've got an example of this here under clause 12.6. The head contractor may direct the subcontractor to proceed immediately with the works, the subject of the variation notification, and the subcontractor must proceed immediately with the work subject to the variation notification and must also provide the head contractor with details of the price of the variation and if there's any time impact to the date of completion as soon as possible after receiving the written direction to proceed with the work and the subject of the variation notification. The price of the variation will be valid under clause 13.0. So as I mentioned earlier, there is an order of precedence of how the builder intends to assess variations formally under the contract. And this is their mechanism that stops you from just claiming whatever you want as a variation cost. So the example here is clause 13.1. Subject to clause 13.3, where the subcontract provides for the valuation of this clause, the head contractor will value the relevant work by reference to prior agreement, rates or prices applied to the head contract, or reasonable rates or prices as otherwise determined by the head contractor. So the builder has assessed your variation, you agree with the assessment of the variation, and you have received in writing an instruction to proceed with the variation on site. Great. So once you have constructed and installed the variation works on site, make sure you include the claim for the variation inside the same payment claim of the month that you've completed the works. Every payment claim you make under Security of Payment Act forces the builder to respond to that payment claim. And in their payment schedule, they have to declare whether or not they're paying you in full against what you're claiming, or every time they don't want to pay you, they have to provide a very clear and unambiguous reason of why they intend not to pay you. And very, very often, the builder will provide a reason that is vague or unclear. And when they do that, they risk being taken to adjudication and having to pay you out anyway. The reason why they get away with providing like very vague and ambiguous reasons is because they know that many subcontractors don't know how to apply for adjudication. Many of them don't even know the Security of Payment Act exists. But thanks to the Security of Payment Act, short form SOPA, this is the mechanism that confirms and protects your cash flow with each monthly progress claim that you submit. I'll tell you a little story. One of my clients, who is a landscaper, was in this situation where there was a meeting and a discussion on site where they agreed as a verbal discussion or verbal agreement, and he never followed up in writing. So basically, for context, my client was a landscaper. He was doing the planter boxes on a rooftop garden, and the wind kept blowing off the mulch off the side, and so the mulch was falling off the side of the building, which obviously is a safety hazard. So to overcome this issue, the builder verbally instructed my client to upgrade from the mulch to a scoria rock. So the rock is much heavier, and when the wind blows, it's not going to blow the rock off the planter box, right? But the problem is, scoria is much more expensive than the mulch. When my client submitted the variation to the builder, thinking it's pretty clear cut that it's a valid variation, his variation was rejected because he didn't oblige the notice of variation requirements under the contract. So he's time barred from the claim. So this is a very, very classic case where you're a tradie and you're agreeing with the site management thinking that they'll look after you, but they don't know the details of the contract or even how a commercial contract works. They're very, very laser focused on building the job, right? And they need you to achieve that purpose. The contract is the CA's problem. The contract is the upper management problem. It's not their problem. So then when you submit the claim and it eventually flows up to the upper management, they go, well, no worries, this guy hasn't obliged the contract, so we're just not going to pay. So basically, here's where the argument sits. My client did not follow the notice requirements under the contract, but we are also forced to upgrade from the mulch to the scoria because of safety reasons. In my experience, if we were to go to adjudication, we would not be successful. The adjudicator would find that because we did not satisfy the notification requirements in the contract, because we signed up to that in the contract, that alone will nullify any other reason. And I told that to my client. But he wanted to go through with the adjudication application anyway, so that we could have a formal assessment and a formal closure on how this was going to transpire. What ended up happening was, when we notified the main contractor that we were applying for adjudication, they ended up revising their payment schedule to reflect that they were going to pay the full amount for the scoria, which surprised both of us. I honestly think that we got lucky, and they probably know that as well. But either way, it's just a good lesson to learn that it's so important to oblige what you signed up to in your contract, because any other excuse or any other site conditions you give is often overridden by the strictness of the contract. So if you found this video helpful, hit that like and subscribe button, or leave me a comment below. I'll make sure to answer any questions you've got. I help subbies with submitting payment claims and reviewing payment schedules and submitting variations and doing everything in accordance with their contract. So if you need help with some of this costing and contract works, reach out to us in the description box below, and I'll see you at the next video.